Hi there, everybody. It's Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and I've got what I hope to be a new series of weekly tutorials, and this is going to be the first one of those projects. So the thought here is just to take something, an idea that came from the live streams, and just try and curate it a little bit more, go a little bit deeper on it, pull it out, make it something that can live on its own. Now, this idea actually is a little bit bigger than I had originally thought it would be, so I'm going to break it out into this one little project, and maybe I can do a follow-up project, and maybe even the third one. I'm not sure. But the idea here is going to be, let me jump to the screen. So we're going to be tackling some sea anemones. The real goal here is to combine the power of Cinema 4D's Hair system along with the new Fields system. So specifically, let's take a look at this National Geographic video and one very specific little part here. We've got all these nice little sea anemones all floating around. And you see how they have these little tendrils and all they're grasping around trying to find food. It's falling up from the surface. But then specifically, check this out. Watch this one right there. See how it kind of sucks in? We're kind of taking inspiration from all these little parts as this was flowing around and the overall shapes and the way that one pulled in. So that's the overall idea. I'm going to make it very stylized. We're not going to get too specific. It's more about the overall techniques than any one of these parts in, specifically. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D S22, possibly R22. I'm not sure how they want us to pronounce it. I prepped a couple of little things here, not too much. I just want to walk through them. I've got the lowest poly fish you can possibly imagine. So there he is. There's our goldfish. And we have this rock right here. Now I'm going to kind of go step by step on the rock because I hate in a tutorial like suddenly showing something that we didn't show how we got there. So you see I've started out with a hemisphere, and then that goes inside this connect object, which is going to weld some of the points in because we cranked the tolerance up really high. So you can see it gets kind of a little bit more randomized. And once that happened, I'm applying a smoothing, which smooths it out a little bit. Then displacing it with a large noise displacement and displacing it a second time with a smaller noise displacement. So we end up with this shape, nice and kind of random. And then after all that's happened, then this bevel is going to kick in, and you see that will round all these edges. Specifically, I have it set to solid. So it's actually not beveling itself. It's just creating these extra subdivisions on the edge. But once that happens, we can put that entire system into this subdivision surface, turn that on, and you can see I'm gonna hit NA shortcut, and you can see this is what we end up with. And like I said, we're going for something a little bit more stylized. So I really love the kind of look of these kind of hard edged shapes, but they get rounded and a little bit soft. I don't know, I always just thought it looked kind of cool. Rather than just a straight up low poly look, you kind of get the smooth low poly look. So it's going to be a rock that we play with. And here's this fish. And you know what? Just for fun, to give it a little bit of life, let's animate our fish. Now, I'm the first one to say I don't like character animation with a bend deformer, but I think in this case, with him just waving back and forth with his fin, it's an appropriate time to do it. So with that in mind, I'll put a bend deformer inside the fish, click fit the parent. You see it's perfectly matching it. I'm going to divide this by 2. We're going to once again leave this very stylized. Just kind of move it to the back. So just this bit of the fin will be wiggling back and forth. And a few keyframes here. Let's increase the strength. The default position is fine where it's tilting off over there. Let's have it tilt 45, or let's do 40 degrees and record. I'll go forward 5 frames and we'll keyframe -40. We'll keyframe that and go forward another 5 frames. And this time we'll do it as a +40. Record. And now that should hopefully, that's going to wiggle back and forth once. But if we go into, can we do it from here? I'm not sure. No, we can't do it from there. So we have to go in the bend. I'm going to right click on the strength. And from here, we can go to animation, show, track. It's going to open up our timeline. And actually, it didn't drag the fish or the bend in. So I'll just drag that in manually. By selecting the bend, you can see that'll pop open all of the properties for the track that's on the bend. And currently, we have a setting here called after, and it's set to constant. So I'm going to change that to repeat. So now it's going to take whatever this current animation is and just repeat it again and again and again. So I think with 0 repetitions, it means it goes forever. I'm not sure. We'll find out. Rewind, hit play. And now you can see we've got this little fish swimming back and forth, waving. And there we go. That's the extent of prepping of that. So looking good. We're ready to rock on our little fish. And let's start building the anemone. In fact, why don't we save this real quick? And then we'll move on. All right. We're going to be working, keep this as simple as possible. Let's use the default Cinema 4D scene scale. And if I were to create a sphere, you can see there it is. Everything else was a little bit bigger. So we'll just leave that at default. Now, once again, just because we're exploring these concepts, we don't want to go too crazy with it. So I'm actually just going to create change the sphere to a hemisphere type. If we hit N, B, you can see that there's not too many polygons involved in it. I'm going to hide the rock right now because it's a little bit in our way. And with just this shape, I think it's actually by default almost perfect for kind of getting the overall shape of the sea anemone kind of stylistically that I want to do here. So without even making this editable, we can select our sphere, go to simulate, click hair objects and say add hair, and boom, we've got some hairs. There's one hair sticking out from every single point. Now, I think I might want to change it to be polygon center, so it's actually one from the center of each polygon. I think the distribution is just a little bit nicer there. And yeah, we can start playing with that right away from there. Now, okay, the fish is going to be a little distracting, so we'll temporarily hide that, but he'll be coming back, no worries. So we've got these hairs. They're immediately falling down because of gravity. Now, this is floating in the sea. I don't think that gravity is going to be having too much of an effect on it, so we need to change its settings, but its dynamic settings are actually directly in the hair. We go into forces, and here's gravity. So no gravity, 0. So that should zero that out. And we hit play, and now nothing's happening. So if we want it to do something, we should add in some turbulence. But you know what? Let's even slow down a little bit from there. Let's make this a little bit more visible. Inside of the hair material that automatically got created with our hair, let's double click that. I like popping out the menu because we can see a little bit more clearly than this stuff over here. And let's begin by changing some colors. I think we're going to make this kind of a purpley pink color. So let's even start with a darker purple, and it will transition up to the peak, which will be a brighter pink color, something like that. There we go. No specular. Here's where the fun comes in. Let's play with the thickness. But what I usually do is jump this up to a larger scale. Let's say 15 by 15. Oop, that's not 15. And now we get this big old one, but we can't see it in the viewport. Now, there are some new features in S22 that make this even better, but you could actually do most of this even a little bit further back in time. So in our hair object, we can go into editor, and currently it's displaying the guidelines, but I'm going to say, actually, I would like to see the hair polygons. And you see it's going to get super crazy because it's generating this based off of all the hairs. And by default, the hair object creates 5,000 hairs. So if I go to the hair tab, you can see it's create, actually, I'm sorry, 50,000 hairs. So we don't need to see all those. In fact, because we're making the sea anemone, I don't think we need any of these hairs at all. So what I want to do is make it so these hairs are not making 50,000. Instead, it's making exactly as many as there are guides. So change root to as guides, and now we get exactly one per guide. So we have very direct control, and we can see it very clearly in the viewport. So now you can see that we can see these individually very clearly, and they're going to show up in the editor, and we can turn on enhanced viewport shading, which is actually going to make them look a little bit nicer. We can catch the shadow a little bit better and have more detail. I mean, if you had individual hairs, you can crank this up or down for the percentage, but it's already set as guide, so we just see them all. So that should just look a little bit nicer than it used to in general. But now we can play around and change the shape of what this anemone's tentacles look like, or whatever the tendrils are called. I'm not sure. Now you see back in the hair material, we can change the thickness from, well, I'd set to 15 by 15. And I like keeping those two numbers the same because that means we can control the profile directly from the spline. So if I want to get skinnier on the end here, we can just pull this down and we have direct control over what the shape is going to be. Now, I think it'd be kind of cool if there was like a little bit of a bulbous tip here. So why don't we pull that down, and I'm gonna pull this one up, and we'll pull that back down again. And we just have it, get a little bit thinner in the middle. But you can see that there's actually not that much fidelity in this overall shape. And the reason for that is it can only subdivide as many times as we told the hair to subdivide. Specifically, how many, I think it's called segments, but it might be, yeah, segments. So if I click back on hair, you can see under the guides that we have 8 segments right now. So this can only subdivide 8 times. If I drag this down, you can see I'll actually drop the spikes because there's no subdivisions. But as we increase it, we're going to increase the fidelity of the way this shape is going to match what we're feeding it. I'm actually going to create one more point here just to create a little bit more of a curve. We'll see if we can catch that a little bit better spot. There we go. So we got a little better stalks going right there. And now we can actually crank this up pretty high. And you can see that it's going to subdivide quite a bit. And we have a lot of control over that. And I do like that. So we're up to 25, which is a lot, but I think that will work. The hairs are actually going to instantly match whatever that was set to because we're as guides. So that's all working well. The problem is going to come into when we do dynamics. Now, if we hit play right now, we're not going to see anything because there's nothing happening. So we need to create some sort of force. the one I will start out with is we'll create a cinema force here from simulate particle, actually simulate forces turbulence. So the turbulence is just a great setting. It just makes things blow in one direction or another. Typically, I go up to 55. I just know for a fact that's going to be a little bit too strong for this one. So we're going to leave it relatively low. In fact, why don't we leave it down at 5 for now? If I hit play, it should play very quickly. But you can see these are going to get very wiggly very quickly because of how many times it's subdivided. Now, if stylistically, if you like that, then that can totally stay that way. Now, I'm actually going to increase the scale quite a bit. And so now as I increase the scale, you can kind of picture, I always say, that you picture this turbulence as like a big giant cloud of noise. We're making this cloud of noise larger and larger. And the larger the noise is, the more that they all react the same way. So as I increase this more and more, you're going to see them behaving more and more uniformly. Now, stylistically, this is a bunch of decisions that you have to make, which is how fast do you want the individual hairs to go? And I know we're making a sea anemone, and that's very specific, but the hope here is that these techniques you can apply them to lots of different things. We can increase the strength if we want to, so these are going to be more affected more quickly, but you can see that they're bending a lot, and I don't want them to bend quite that much. So a setting that you can change if you don't want them to be quite as bendy is we can go into the Dynamics tab of hair, and under Advanced, there's a setting called Guides, and essentially what you're doing is, currently it's subdivided 25 times. We're going to say, well, as far as dynamics are concerned, pretend that you're only subdivided, in this case, 8 times. And you see that they can't bend quite as much, and they're a little bit smoother in the way that they move. So honestly, this default of 8 is actually working quite well for me. So I think I will leave it there. And this turbulence is working nicely. But what I'm thinking is, I'm going to make this turbulence even larger. I want these all to behave very uniformly. They're all doing a very similar thing. But what I usually like to do is make 2 different turbulences. I'm going to make a second one. Let's rename one of them Turbulence Large, and we'll rename the other one Turbulence Small. And this Turbulence Small, actually, let's turn off Large because we know what that one's doing. So on this Turbulence Small, I'm going to make it a lot smaller. So let's see how small we can go and get something. But you'll see as we make this smaller and smaller, how much these individual hairs are each doing their own thing. So we get these really nice wiggles individually. You see all these are kind of fighting with each other up here. That's working really nicely. Now, we could slow it down because this is having a little bit more of an effect. So these can, do little smaller movements. They could be just as big as well if we wanted them to. But by combining the 2 of these now, let's give ourselves even a few more frames here. I'm going to jump it up to, I don't know, about 333. So now you can see that they all are moving uniformly together, but you get this little bit of individual flavor. So the stronger that you make the small turbulence, the more that they're going to feel like individuals, and the more, in comparison that the large turbulence is, the more that that's going to feel like it's got more of the power, and that they behave together. So right now, actually, that feels pretty good. I like the way that looks. While we're at it, let's just make a nice material to put onto the geometry for our shape here. So I'm just going to make a new material. In fact, we're going really cartoony with this. So I'm going to turn off the color channel, turn off the reflectance. And in fact, I'll just use the eyedropper, and I'm going to eyedrop from the base of the overall stalk here and apply that directly here. And there we go. That should just blend in very nicely. Excellent. That looks pretty nice, actually. Excellent. So we're going to want to start making this be reactive. So what do we want to react to? Well, we want to react to the fish. So let's turn our fish on. And there's our little guy. Now, while I want it to be the fish, it's going to take Cinema, when it's using fields, geometry takes quite a bit of time to calculate, and even though he's incredibly low poly, it's going to calculate a lot faster if we control this via a spherical fall off. So with that in mind, actually, let's go ahead and create a spherical fall off right away, or any shape that we want to. Right in this drop down menu, we have all of our different field types, and whatever shape we think is going to best match our fish, we could create here. Now, I think a spherical field is completely fine and acceptable here, but let's do, I don't know, is that a good idea? We'll keep it simple. No reason not to keep it simple. We'll create a spherical field. We'll put it inside the fish. I'm going to click the Reset PSR button so it zeroes out onto the fish. And there we go. This is now the distance that things will react. This will eventually be the distance in which things react to the fish. So I can increase the radius here, and that's how far things will react. So do we actually want the fish to have to brush it, or do we want to just have to be nearby? I'm not sure. I think the way they actually would react is you have to bump into it. But you know what? I like the idea of that being a little bit bigger so they'll react a little bit more distant too. our goldfish here. So that will be the start. In fact, we'll just rename this one spherical field fish. Excellent. Now, what is it going to be controlling? Well, in this case, I think that the whole point of this actually is all about using vertex maps. So we've got our sphere object, which is where the hairs are getting cloned onto. Let's make that editable. So with that editable, we can create a regular old cinema vertex map. The easiest way to do that is just go into point mode, go to select, and create actually right here, set vertex weight. And it doesn't matter what we say, 0 is fine. Now it's got a vertex map. We can immediately see it highlighted because we're on point mode and we have the object selected, and there's our vertex map. So if we turn on the use fields checkbox, now we can use fields to drive exactly what's happening here. Now, by default, there's a freeze. We're going to get rid of that. We don't want that. But what we do want is the fish field we've got right here. Now, the fish is a little bit far away. We can't see it too clearly. So let's move the fish a little bit closer. So we'll go to object mode, grab the fish. We'll move it down. As soon as I move it down, you can see, boom, now it's starting to glow a little bit from where the fish is, in theory, close to it. Now, this is in the vertex map. And we're going to be making a couple vertex maps to try and keep it very clean. Technically, I think you could layer all these up directly inside of a single vertex map, but there's less clarity to that. So I always try and separate these out. So we're just going to rename this one Fish1. So this is our vertex map named Fish1. Now, this is just looking at this fall off. That's working quite nicely. And here's my thought. When the fish gets near, this could potentially make them scale away. Actually, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's take a look at what this does by itself. I'm going to keyframe the fish. We'll keep this simple. I'm going to scoot them out so you see actually none of his fall off is touching it. And we'll keyframe it, just the position. And let's fast forward. I'm going to play until right about there. That's long enough. And right around there, he'll have passed right by it. So with that in mind, we can hit play. And what we should see, hopefully, is a vertex map pretty much pass right over the entire object. And nothing really happens yet because we haven't fed this. We haven't fed the vertex map into anything. So what do we want to control? Well, there's a couple different places potentially you could drive this, but the one I'm preferring right now is inside of our hair material. We can control the length or the scale. To tell you the truth, visually, I haven't found a difference. So I'm going to use scale. And, because, fish, scale. Anyway, under effects, we can turn on a vertex map, and inside of this vertex map, we can drag anything that we want. In this case, Fish1. Excellent. Now, we're not going to see it here in the viewport, unfortunately. Sadly, vertex maps don't transfer into the awesome new viewport settings for the hair, but, work with what we got. But we see this is affecting, the vertex map is there. So let's hit render and see what we see. Oh, look at that. We definitely see that it's changed, but you see it's backwards from what we want. I want the ones where the vertex map has been applied. That should be where they're gotten small, and the rest should be the opposite. Now, technically, we could control that in the shader. We could there's even an invert checkbox there, but I want to keep it very visual. I want to be able for us to interact with these directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second vertex map just because I know we're going to need one. So here's a second vertex map. And we'll rename this one Fish2. And inside of this vertex map, there's something that's really cool that you can do. I'm going to delete out the spherical field from there. And what we can do is drag in a different vertex map. So by dragging this first one in, this is referencing the first one. But now we can modify this however we want to and not have any effect on the original one. So it's a really cool way of propagating any effect that you build into one into other ones. So with Fish2, we've dragged Fish1, and the basic thing that we could do is just invert this. So I'm going to say invert. So in the modifier layers, there's an invert. So now we've got the opposite. You can now see that this is partially red and the rest is yellow. So if I hit render, you can now, we have to go into our vertex map here and drag in Fish2 because that's the one we're controlling. So just drag this down. And now as it moves in, we should be able to hit render. And now you can see that those have shrunk away from the fish, but the rest haven't been affected. Another thing I'm going to want to do right now, something I just found out, is you see how these hairs are they're flat. They're entirely flat. But something that's neat is inside of your render settings, you hit Control or Command B to pop open your render settings. Inside of here, if you change your renderer from standard to physical, then it's actually going to change the way physical views hairs is it kind of has to generate geometry for it to see them. So if I hit render right now, it's actually going to generate the geometry, and you see that these actually get thickness. So first of all, those just look cooler like that. And all we have to do is change the renderer, and now we've got that without generating geometry live in the viewport. So it's kind of a nice little advantage there. So I'm actually quite pleased with that. That's working really well. The fish will pass through. They should move. Like I said, sadly, we don't see them. But let's send this to the picture viewer, because I don't think it's going to take too long for that to render out. We'll stop it after it's gone a little bit. And we don't need it to be very large resolution. So we'll just say divided by 2. And render. Yes, continue without saving. And we'll just let this go for a few frames. Shouldn't take too long at all. And as our fish moves in, we can immediately see all of, oh, look at that. Running away from the fish. And instantly, as our fish moves away, swimming his little tail, all those are going to pop back into place and continue wafting through the turbulence. So let's stop that from rendering. Just take a look at what we ended up with. Yeah, instantly reactive. So that by itself is pretty cool. If you wanted to stop there, you can just see how you can use Vertex Maps to drive the way these hairs are behaving. But let's see if we can take it a little bit further. My thought is, I do like how some of them initially move, but my thought is if this gets kind of touched by the fish at all, then maybe it can grow and the entire thing will shrink inside. So let's do that. And we can do this again with fields. So with fields, currently we're inverting this overall effect, but before we invert, I'm going to actually temporarily turn that off, and let's actually scoot our fish in so we can see how it's interacting. For our purposes, I'm going to scoot the fish up a little bit. So I'm going to delete out. I'm going to go to the Y position and hold down Control and Shift as I click on the keyframe, and that's going to delete all the keyframes on Y. And what that means is he's still animated, just not on Y anymore. And with that means I can just scoot it up a little bit. And now it'll continue on that same motion. So now you see it's just going to graze it. It's only going to hit the little bit of the top there. So how do we get this to grow and spread to the rest of it? Well, there's several ways, but in this case, let's create a freeze modifier layer inside of our field. With the freeze, I'm going to say I want to add. I'm going to view what's below and then add to it. And how are we going to affect it? Well, I want to grow. And we've got these different settings here. It's always a good idea to not just guess and check what this radius is. Go ahead on your geometry. And in this case, I'm going to select our sphere, which is actually our C anemone. I don't know how to spell that, so I'm just going to type in, I think I did save it. Oh, wait, here I can copy anemone from here. How do we spell that? Anemone. There we go. Anyway, sorry, little detour. Under the freeze, we want to grow. Now let's click on the anemone model and see how far apart these points are approximately. I want to view it. I think this is flat on. So if I were to grab these 2 points, that's approximately flat on. You can see that they have a distance of a little bit more than 27. So they're probably about 30 units apart. These are maybe a little bit more vertically. Yeah, these are about 40 apart. So that's about our distance. So just to be safe, I'm going to do a distance of, let's say, 55. But that means it's going to grow very quickly through the entire thing. Let's just take a look at that. We should be able to hit play. And you can see, boom, that even though just the top is being grazed, the entire thing is growing very quickly. So that could be fine, but let's slow it down a little bit. Let's go really extreme. I'm going to say 10%. And now when I go pass by, you see very slowly the rest of it grows. I've covered this before, but what's happening is it's viewing a point that has some power. And if it can reach the radius, let's say a distance of 55 units away, it's saying, okay, cool. This neighbor has that, so I need to start applying some power as well. I'm going to apply 10% of the power. So that's why it's going to be like 10%, 20%, 30%, and it's going to slowly add. So even though we have a relatively large radius, our low effect strength means it will grow slowly over the surface. So excellent. That's working really well. Now, what we could try and do here is click invert to invert that end result, because we already know that we want the opposite when we feed it in. But you're going to see that's going to start flashing back and forth. And that's because of the way that this freeze behaves. It's trying to grow based on the previous shape, but then this is inverting it. And then the freeze gets reapplied and it tries to grow. So this invert is messing it up. Now there might be different methods to do this, but for me, like I said, I like just making another vertex map. It does not take up too much information. It doesn't slow down very much. So by making another vertex map, we shall just name it Fish 3. What is this one doing? inside of the fields? Well, we'll just delete everything and we'll just drag in fish 2. So we're just kind of daisy chaining these vertex tags, and now we've got this one under control. So we can add the invert in now after the fact. So this one is free to grow, and this one will do the inverting. So along those lines, when this passes by, that should grow and slowly turn red. And now the entire thing is red. Now the problem here is that this is permanently red. There's nothing that's going to make this fade away. And that's a bit of a problem. There might be additional methods here. I kind of want to explore more, but a very straightforward solution we can do here is make another spherical field that can erase this back out again. So with that in mind, I'm going to create a duplicate of our spherical fish field, and I'm just going to call this one fade. So this one needs to be way bigger. So I'm going to hit T for scale and scale it way up. And essentially what we're saying is the plan is to say that you are only allowed to grow and get fully covered if you are inside of fish fade. Once fish fade moves away, then it's going to kind of go back to its original color. Now you have to be careful. It can get really confusing once you start using the invert because everything becomes the opposite. So I'm going to turn the invert off. We don't even need to think about that one for now. And let's just deal with our new spherical fish fade. Actually, I like that name, so we'll add another word, fish. The spherical field fish fade. And in this case, in the third tag, fish 3, we're going to drag in that fade. And this new fade is, you can see how it's causing that to fade out a little bit already, where it's only full power in that inner part of the circle. So that's actually working pretty well by default, but it's overriding everything underneath it. So we need to change the way it's blending from normal to multiply. So now this should be viewing everything that comes underneath it. So let's just view this. This is not inverted, but we should see it grow. But then the fish doesn't go quite far enough away. So we will animate the fish a little bit more. I'm going to give us a few extra keyframes. And at that keyframe, we will override it, hit E for move. And I'm just going to, whoopsie, make sure we're on object mode and scoot the fish until the fall off is fully away. And we shall keyframe the fish again, just the Z parameter. So it should override the current one. So we hit play. This should go through, and it's inside the range, so it's able to grow, and then it moves out of the fall off. Now we have a lot of control over the way this fall off behaves. So in this case, you can see it's got really big fall off. Let's hide the previous one, just so we can see this one. You can see there's really big fall off range. So what I'm thinking is let's make that not quite as much of a fall off. So we can go into remapping, and here is the control here. And I'm going to make this inner one larger. So it's pretty much like, okay, you can be full power inside of the circle, and then you slowly fade out over there. Excellent. So we should see this is going to just get grazed by the other one, but it fully grows. And then as the fish moves away, it becomes black again. So that's a pretty robust little setup there, and hopefully not too complicated. It can get complicated if you don't break these things apart, but you can see how we layered them. Hopefully they're not too crazy. So now that that all seems to be working, we can say, okay, let's take that end result here and invert that. We're safe to do that because it's not dependent on, and you see it's not flickering back and forth or anything. So it wasn't dependent on anything else, so inverting is safe. Hit play, and now it's inverted, so you see it's actually a yellow, which means it's full size, and then it turns black for a moment and then goes back to yellow. So with all of that in mind, we should be able to go into our hair material and transfer in fish 3. And let's just send this immediately to the picture viewer to see the end result, because we sadly cannot see it in the viewport. And we'll let the fish begin swimming. It's going to take a moment for it to go. While that's happening, why don't we set up something to make this feel just a little bit more underwater? And that will be, we'll create an environment. So with this environment, we can turn on enable fog. And immediately you see we got this nice big fog going. To make this feel a little bit underwater, we can add in maybe a blue. You can add in kind of any blue color. I'm going to go a little bit teal. We'll add in some of that. We'll make it a lot darker. And you can immediately see it'll fill in the background. And then we can grab the distance and start shrinking that up. And as we shrink it, you see that we're going to get this nice instant fog, even in the viewport. So that's looking pretty nice. Another important thing to note is we set this up to render in physical, which gave us that nice, there's like a thickness to all the tentacles. But the fog doesn't seem to work in standard renderer on the hairs, but it does work in physical. So that's just kind of a nice little addition we get there. So I'm not sure how long it takes fully to fade out, but let's see what we've got here. Hit play. It shrinks away, and then boom, they can all spring back out again. So I'm actually quite pleased with that. That seems to work really nicely. Now, you have a lot of artistic control that you can add on top of this. Currently, we're just letting it fade away, but we do have the ability to add some things like some decay. We could add some springiness potentially so that they have a little bit of wiggle on top of it. The scale, I'm not sure if scale can go above 100%. I actually didn't even test it. It would kind of be fun to test it. You see that currently it's a scale of 100, but it can go above 100. So just for fun, I don't know what this will do. It could be terrible, but inside of our effect right here, why don't we try creating a decay? I always say that, a delay. We have delay and decay, and I say the wrong name even though I always click the right one. So we have a delay, which is just like the old, what do you call it? I'm blanking on it. Is it just the, yeah, it was the delay effector. But inside the delay effector, almost everybody immediately goes to the spring. So we can now spring everything that's happening below it. So I want it to be pretty springy just so we can see the effect. And currently, fields are clamped. You see, we get this nice little clamp checkbox. That means all the values are trapped between 0 and 1. But if we want this to overshoot its original position, then we have to unclamp it. And hopefully, I don't know, but hopefully this hair parameter scale allows it to overshoot beyond that. And if it does, we might be able to get a little bit of extra life out of this. So we shall hit save just in case. And let's render that to the picture viewer one more time and see what the end result of that happens to be. Here comes our little fish moving along. I mean, it should actually do the springiness and the shrink and the grow. So it might shrink and go wobble, wobble, wobble on the bottom. So we might actually want to stop it from doing that, but it also could be fun. They seem to shrink down these little spheres, which actually stylistically I'm kind of fine with. And they're all popping back out again very nicely. Oh yeah, look, they are springing. Now they can't scale less than 0. So they shot down, they scaled to less than 0, and then they got clamped there. And now they're allowed to grow out. So at least the spring was working on the ground level. And let's see if these overshoot. Yeah, look at that. Oh, we put a lot of spring on there. So these are probably way over springy, but we did that just to make sure it was working. And man, is it totally working. So yeah, it's springiness on top of it. So that should be able to just bring a little bit more life to like them shooting out and wiggling. Let's just let this bounce one more time before we hit play. And you can see the fog coming through here on the render as well. Yeah, really springy. So let's see what that does. Yeah, look how wiggly that is. Wow, that's really cool. I didn't know if that would work, and it totally did. Alrighty. So with that in mind, let's stop that. We'll just keep that behaving that same way. Keep in mind that you have the ability to do different kind of clamps. We could stop. We could actually delay could be added. I don't know. I don't want to go too far experimenting with something I haven't played with too much, but there's a lot of places to explore by using some springiness. You could add some smoothing, which will slow them all down. It'll be smoother in their motion. You could also use decay and make sure that, it could get pushed down and live there longer before it slowly fades back out again. There's a lot of possibilities on there. In fact, we could put. Well, we could put the decay. That would slow everything down a little bit. Yeah, it's a little dangerous. So let's just not do it. Okay, all that is working really well. What I'd like to do now is try and apply a little bit of color to the effect. So what do we got right now? Well, we've got 3 different vertex tags. But let's say when the fish gets near, essentially as they're shrinking, it'll choose a different color to fade to. So in order to do that, we're going to need a different type of tag. We're going to need a right-click on your object, go to Other Tags, and grab the vertex color because it didn't have a home, so it's in the Other menu. So Vertex Color, I'm going to move it to the end just because it's kind of like if we're daisy chaining, I like to think of them in kind of order. So inside of that, I'm going to click on Use Fields, and we don't need the freeze, but what we do want is to drag in one of our vertex maps. So we'll drag in Fish 3, and there's something that's really cool. We can drag this tag in, and it's really easy to get colors from them because we can go into remapping, and I'm going to enable remapping. But once you turn on enable remapping, we can now remap the color. So with remap color, we can say, I want this to be a gradient, and we can choose the different colors. So I think that the first, actually the last color here, this is the color that they're going to start out as. So we can go to this kind of pinky purple color. And this is going to be the color that they kind of shrink to. So I'm going to make it kind of a, let's make it kind of a sickly green. They don't like when something gets near, so I'm going to turn this bright green and shrink in. Maybe it's, this is not correct for the critters. We're just having fun with it. And that should hopefully work. We might be able to remap things onto slightly different colors, but let's just hit play, and we're not going to see it here. But when I hit render, oh, we haven't applied it anywhere. You can actually see the Vertex color map applying directly onto here. So you can actually see that the green is indeed being applied where they would shrink. So actually that is giving us pretty good feedback, even if it's not directly on the hairs. So potentially we could remap the color. I'm actually a little bit curious if we could, change the offsets here. So yeah, you can see I could increase this and change the way that these are mapping a little bit. We might be able to like increase the power even more. Yeah, change the max, remap all those. In fact, we could probably even go to a curve and change the way that these colors are applied. So we could do something like that. So they're actually purple in the beginning, and as soon as they're affected at all, they should turn to a pretty bright green right away before that is applied. So assuming that's all working, we want to control the color of these hairs. So how do we control the color of a hair? Well, we can do it in the material again. And in this case, we're going to go into the color channel. Now, there's a lot of places you can potentially feed this material. So you could feed, there's different spots, but not all of them accept the Vertex map. And one that won't is actually the color channel right here. That will not accept it, but one that will is the roots. So if in the roots, we set the effect Vertex map, we can drag in our Vertex color, and that should be feeding in the color. Now, once again, unfortunately, we don't get the direct feedback in here. We only see it on the surface of the object as the fish passes by it, but that should apply to that. Currently, the blending is set to normal, which means that completely takes over. And that means it's going to be like a solid color just on that color. So if we want to add a little variation in there, we could go into our color channel here and maybe set this to, I want it to be black and white. So I'm going to go to a darkish gray. And then on the other side, I'm going to go to a lightish gray. And I didn't want to go all the way to make it too extreme, because now what we can do is set this blend mode to overlay. So that should overlay our color on top of it. And if we hit render, hopefully we'll see that we still get this nice gradient transitioning from one to the other. If we hit play and let the fish do its thing a little bit and hit render, then hopefully, oh yeah, look at that. Look at this nice transition where they turn gray and then to green. And we're getting this color where they're lighter on the tip and darker on the base because of this color overlay. If we wanted the base to be darker, we'd always grab, this and make it a little bit darker there. And that's going to force that to transition to be even darker. So that's all working quite nicely. I'm pleased with that. If we were inclined, we could even go into our material, and in the luminance channel, we can also feed it that same vertex map. So let's say vertex. And in here, we'll drag the color, the Vertex color map, and that should also be colorized. And that one we do see in real time. So you can see how the colors are being applied. And if we hit render, you see even the surface is going to change to those colors. Now, because it's going to this base color, you see it's actually quite bright compared to it. So we could say this should multiply, and we don't want any color. Let's just multiply by something relatively dark. There we go. So now you can see that that's very close in color. I'm just going to eyeball it. I like this kind of cartoony look. So there we go. It's kind of just transitioning into the surface. And when this is a little bit earlier, before the fish gets there, hopefully that's kind of the same kind of dark purple color down there as well. So that's actually working quite nicely. I think this is, let's send it to the picture viewer. And while that's rendering, let's give ourselves a little quick save here and continue to the next part. Now, my thought is what if we wanted to clone a whole series of these onto different places, onto that rock that we set up, and we want the fish to be able to make all of them react kind of in order. Now, there's kind of some manual ways that we could do this where we just kind of rebuild the entire rig, but I thought maybe let's make a little bit more robust of a rig so that if we want to make changes, we could make the changes relatively easily. And you can see how quickly that hair is rendered here. And this isn't physical, so it's actually even a little bit slower than regular hairs, but it's just still really fun to be able to see this and how quickly they come through. Oh, I forgot to chill the spring out a little bit, so it's still going to wiggle a lot, but let's hit play. Yeah, really fun. I love this reactive stuff. Like, fields have made everything so much more powerful. So with that in mind, let's start setting up this. Before I forget the spring, let's fix the spring. So delay spring, let's say 25% instead of 75. Okay, so that should chill out the springiness. Now, we want to start cloning a whole bunch of these. So what do we need? Well, we need the rock that we made. So let's unhide that rock. And we need to clone this mesh a bunch of times. So how do we go about doing that? Well, I mean, we'll make a cloner, obviously. We'll throw in our anemone, and it's going to clone onto an object. And that can be just the surface of the rock. And then you can see, boom, it's going to start making a bunch of clones all over the place. I'm going to temporarily turn off the hair. And it's rendering right now. And actually, we probably should stop it from rendering. Picture viewer. Oh, it is done rendering. Excellent. So it's done there. So we are cloning a bunch of these all over the place. And currently the rotation is no good. And in fact, I just messed up my camera by spinning weird. So I'm going to go to, I think there's a shortcut. I'm going to go to parallel and then back to perspective. And now we're back to a normal camera. So with that all set, keep on clicking, it's spinning weird. With that done, this is cloning a surface, which is completely fine. I just want this to be in the correct rotation. I'm not sure what it is, so I think it's P. I'm going to try 90 on P. As okay, it's a correct rotation, but I need to say negative 90. If I say negative 90, now it's pretty much right there on the surface, and it's working quite nicely. Now, it's not sunk into the surface at all. I don't really want to sink it into the surface, because if we do, then the tentacles will be kind of coming up out of the ground, but I don't want it floating out of the middle of nowhere. But everywhere we clone, that we're cloning our hairs, or the hairs are being generated, is going to be all of this geometry. We can't really limit it unless we kind of explode it and make it less parametric. So one thought I have is, let's copy and paste our cloner, delete the contents, and I will create a second sphere. And remember, we left everything default, so I can just drop that in. And on the second one, I'm going to turn on, let's turn on the hemisphere again. And on this cloner, we'll just have it spin to positive 90. So you can see that we get this counter shape on the backside. So those should be identical and they should be matching. Now I kind of didn't think about this, but the vertex map might not match perfectly there. It's not a detail I'm terribly worried about right now, but it's something to keep in mind. I just wanted a shape to complete there. Now, what I would like to do is maybe let's have these, any change we make to one, we have to make to both. So with both cloners selected, I'm going to make a push apart effector. Not one I typically use, but sometimes it can be useful. Push apart, and then you see that it's actually going to force these away from each other. And it's going to make sure they're not overlapping too much. And now I don't want to overthink it. So let's just keep on clicking both cloners, both selected. We'll go to object mode, and we'll just keep on clicking different random seeds until we get a layout that we like the look of. And now this one's actually, I didn't expect to find one so quickly, but this one's actually not too bad. There's more, I mean, there's a lot more detail. Like I said, I don't want to worry about the details too much. Otherwise, this tutorial will be 3 hours long. So I'm going to copy that number. I like the look of it. Let's just tick through a couple more times, see if we find any others that we like a little bit more. And we do, I am cloning 20 of them right now, which might be a little excessive to tell you the truth. Let's drop it down to 15 is a fine number. Ooh, there we go. I like the look of this one. So this will be our layout. Now, a couple things that we need to do, like these vertex maps will not acknowledge, actually the vertex maps I think do a fine job, but we can only feed one vertex map into the material. So if that's the case, and we got two of these materials, I just want to make sure I got the right one. Okay, this one is dead. That one doesn't do anything. So I got rid of an extra material just so we don't get confused. We've got all of these, and we can only feed one vertex map in, but technically there's like 15 of them, so we can't do all of that. So here's a trick, and hopefully we get this to work properly. I'm going to grab this entire cloner, and I'm going to drop the entire thing into a connect. I can hold down Alt as I create a connect, and now that's been merged in. All of these are one shape, technically, and I'm going to turn off weld. Now, you can't drag vertex maps onto a connect. This just doesn't work, but there is someplace you can drag them, and that is if we create a correction deformer. So a correction deformer is pretty crazy. It is actually making a copy of all the points and polygons, I think even edges. And if we were to select this and go to point mode, it's a little bit hard to see because these are all purple. So I'm going to change our display mode to have no materials. You can actually see that there's a point on every single one of these. So we can actually take those and manipulate the object or even the polygons. And you see I'm on a correction deformer, not the actual object. And this would actually deform that geometry, which is pretty cool. But that's not what we're worried about right now. What we are worried about is dragging all of the relevant tags from our anemone and onto the correction deformer. And now, with any luck, let's grab our fish and we're going to give him new animation. So I'm just going to delete all of his current keyframes. So no more movement for the fish, but the fish is going to move. Let's make sure we're on object mode. I'm going to move the fish so it's pretty close to one of these. So it should be definitely within the fall off. And if I select the correction deformer, and let's just grab the first tag and go into point mode, then you're going to see that this correction deformer is actually taking on the attributes of this vertex tag. You actually see that this is falling off from where the fish currently is. So this is very, very good news for us. That means we can kind of parametrically make as many clones as we want and not worry about these tags. We only still have one tag that we can feed directly into hair. In fact, we didn't even copy it. We just moved it. So we didn't break any of those old connections. Now we do need to grow the hairs. We've got our hair object, which is currently turned off. If I turn it on, it's still just viewing that original object, which is cloned away. It's not existing there anymore. So we need to feed it a different object. And that object will be, it doesn't work with it doesn't work on the cloner. It doesn't work on the original anemone. It doesn't work on the correction, but it does work on the connect. Remember, when in doubt, use a connect object. Now, the connect object, well, this isn't about the connect. When you drag a different object for hair to be on, if there is now a higher point count, a higher poly count, then it is currently generating the same number of hairs that it used to. So we actually need to grow as many new hairs as it can, essentially one for every polygon. So an easy thing you do is just type in a big number, and as soon as you kind of click off anywhere, it'll acknowledge it, and it'll drop down to exactly the, in this case, polygon center count. So there's exactly 960 polygons in this overall scene, and you see it instantly created all of those. Now, if things go a little bit weird there, and it's not behaving, make sure that you are still set to polygon center, and you might have to hit reroute and regrow. But in this case, everything worked perfectly fine for us. So you can see that we've got all these clones and we've got all these nice anemones copied all over the place. And hopefully everything else is pretty much still working. So let's go ahead and do a quick save on that one and do a little bit of a test. In fact, let's just hit render and see what we see. Okay, this is a very good sign. This new anemone, which was cloned, is shrinking and it has the proper color. So it looks like everything transferred over exactly the way we wanted it to. Now, I'm trying to think, is there any way that we can... I actually hadn't thought about it, but I'm not. We're not feeding the same material onto the bottoms of these, and I want to solve that problem. And so, without having done any tests, let's think about it. With the setup we currently have is kind of this entire thing is transferring through. So here's my thought. Let's go ahead and make this. We're going to go and make this the base. So that's where everything's already been. And now let's make a duplicate of that material, and let's call this one underside. So here's my thought is if we do the exact same idea, I'm going to copy the correction. Actually, we'll put, undo that. Let's do the same setup. So in this second cloner, I'm going to put it into a connect. If you hold down, is it Alt? I'm blanking right now. If I hold down Alt as I create it, you see it automatically makes it as a parent, which is good. Turn off weld. And excellent. Now, the reason we can't put this all in one object is because the hairs are going to copy onto every single polygon inside of the connect, and we didn't want that. So now we've got the separate connect. The separate connect can also be given a correction, and that correction is going to be fed all of our vertex information. But we don't need to have it do all this double calculation from everything. All we need to do is, I think we can delete all of those and just use this vertex color tag, and we will feed it the same source that we were feeding the other one, which is just this original fish 3. Because vertex maps don't care about what object they're on. They just care about how far away from the object are they. So with that in mind, let's apply I'm going to apply the underside material onto our copy. We might need to make it editable. I'm not sure. We'll find out. And in the underside, let's go into the vertex map and make sure that we link our brand new vertex color tag. If you wanted to, you can always rename it if you're being nice and clean. It's always a good idea. So this one could be vertex color underside, just so we know that that is the one that is linked. So we have a brand new material applied, and that one should transfer through. Let's hit render and see if that works. I think it did. I don't know for sure, but these seem to transition correctly into the color underneath it. So we were able to combine both of those. Excellent. We've got this rock. Maybe it's, I mean, everything's very cartoony right now. So we can make a cartoony material. I mean, if it's very cartoony, we can just use a luminance channel, and we can do something like, we got a couple different options. We could make a gradient. We can do a Fresnel. Personally, I think it's kind of fun to do a fall off shader. If you haven't played with fall off shaders, they're very nice. And this concept can apply to a lot of third-party renderers as well. What this fall off shader is doing is it wants to know what orientation is important. So we got X, Y, and Z. And we're saying the more Y that it is, the more flat, then the more it should apply. So in this case, this is saying when something's very flat, I think it'll be white. And when it's not very flat on the top, then it will become black. So just by making that material, just this straight luminance, drop this inside of our rock right there, hit render, then we should be able to see that, yeah, the top is kind of one color and the sides get darker. So the entire thing is too bright for my liking. So let's make a darker gray. And that can transition into a pretty dark gray, but not quite all the way. Something like that. So that should be based on kind of a color fall off along those lines. So yeah, there's a little bit of transition there. Now the whole thing, I mean, we've got the environment, so everything's going to flat. You see when you get closer, there's a little bit more variation. So that should make that pop out just a little bit. And, you know, you can, this is not what this tutorial is about, so we won't spend too much time. You can also make a fusion, and in this case, I can throw in a Fresnel fall off, so you kind of get this look very flat. I can invert the gradient there, so it's kind of looks like a regular object. And we'll set this to overlay on top of what we already had. So we got that base color, now it's going to overlay it, and that should just make a little bit more of the detail pop in a kind of a stylized way. Completely fine for this super basic test. I just want it to look a little bit better. So now let's make sure that this is indeed working for our overall fish. We should name some things. So this is going to be, this will be the hair base. This will be the I guess it's the, let me copy the word, anemone underside. And okay, that's working fine. And what do we want to do? Well, we want the fish to travel past a bunch of these. I think the best way to do that is going to be, let's create a spline. So how hard is it going to be to make a spline here? I'm not sure. It's going to actually be really hard to make a spline here. So let me show you a couple tricks. We're making this up as we go. So we got a bunch of these clones, but my thought is, what if we made a tracer object? Yeah, let's do this. We can make kind of anything. I'm going to make a sphere in this case, and let's just move the sphere someplace. So I'm going to turn on snapping. You can do the shortcut Shift S, which will turn on snapping. And you can see as I move it, snapping to all these different points. I can drag it to one of the anemones and then turn off snapping. But I know now that I'm approximately in the correct place. So let's say the fish is going to start there. And I'm going to copy and paste. So now I've got a copy of this. I'm going to turn on snapping again. Let's say I want to travel here. Turn off snapping. I'm going to move it up just a little bit. Copy paste. And now where do I want to travel next? Well, turn on snapping. Move it approximately here. He's going to be swim past all the anemone. So now turn off snapping, and I'll move it up a little bit. Actually, that one snapped a little far back, so I'm going to pull it forward. And then copy paste. And this one, I don't know, let's be careful here, because why not? I'm just going to eyeball this one, move it here, copy paste again. Actually, you could just control drag, but copy paste works as well. Let's turn on snapping, because I want to snap down here. Turn off snapping, move it up, copy paste, snapping one more time. Actually, I guess there's two more he can swim past. So move this over here. Say it with me. Snap, unsnap, move it. Copy, paste. Snap. Snap. Don't snap anymore. Pull forward. The snapping just really speeds that kind of stuff up. Excellent. So now you see we've got kind of the sequence of spheres, and that by itself isn't doing any, us too much good, but I'm going to select all these spheres. I'm not sure if this works, but let's turn on a tracer. And yeah, because they were all selected, all of those were put inside of the tracer. Now it's going to be tracing those, but if instead we say, I want you to connect, nope, not connect elements, connect all objects. And now you can see that there is a line traveling from one to the next one. Now currently, it's actually traveling through every point of the sphere. It's going to be really weird, but let me show you. I'm going to hide the spheres. And you see it's actually tracing all the different points of the sphere, which is cool, but we don't want that. So I'm going to say don't trace the vertices. And now it's just going from the axis to the axis to the axis to the axis of each of these. And it's creating that line for us. Now, there's a lot of ways we could have done that. We could have just probably cut and moved a thing, but I was able to place that pretty cleanly, pretty easily. So at that point, I can make a copy paste of our tracer, and this one I'll make editable. Now, maybe we want to go back and change those later. So I'm just going to turn off that nice little hierarchy we made. I'll even make these children of it so we can collapse it. You see they're all turned off. They're not having any effect. And now we just got our nice tracer set up. So now we can grab our points and change our spline type. We can change it to a Bezier. Let's go to a B-spline. That's very smooth. B-spline will turn on a uniform shape. And you can see that's actually going to start smoothing this out. It's a very smooth line, actually. Now, it's so smooth that I'm going to manually grab a couple of these and just make sure that they are just enough away from the surface that our fish will not be colliding with them. This one very close, but you see it makes a very smooth curved line. So I do like Bezier curves a lot. Curve that one up. Now this technique is actually useful in a lot of different places. I've used it for several things. Keep in mind the Bezier curve, the points don't actually end up on the spline directly. It's making it so smooth that it actually floats them away. So as I go to select a point, I'm just kind of aiming for the general area where I know the point exists. And then hopefully it will select it. In this case, I'm actually having a little bit of trouble. There we go. It's way over there. There we go. Pull that one up. And we got our last one, which actually isn't too bad. I'll just make it travel a little bit further. Excellent. So that becomes hopefully a path for our fish to swim. Now it doesn't have a guide spline yet, so let's see if we need one. I'm not sure if we will. So, and also I haven't checked, but let's see how quick this runs. I'm gonna hit, let's do another quick save. And let's hit play. Yeah, it's not, it's about 7 frames a second. So it's not amazing, but it's definitely workable. So yeah, we've got our fish path. So we can move our nice little fishy up to the top, right click, animation tags. It needs a align to spline tag. The spline, oh, click on it. The spline that we want is in the tag tab. Drag in our fish path. We want it to be tangential. And now you can see the fish has jumped over there. It's actually, the spline is backwards from what I thought it was. Do I care? The fish could come from this direction. I mean, if I do care, then all you have to do is select the fish path. I'm going to select all the points. Right click and say point order reverse. And now the fish is going to jump at the other side. Now I intentionally designed the fish when I modeled him to be Z forward. So his forward part here, Z, is pointing that way. So that automatically means he's aligning correctly. If you happen to model something that's not aligned correctly, a very easy way to fix it would be to, let me just show you. I've got the fish selected. I can hit Alt G. And now I put him into a group, and that group is exactly where the model was. And I could then move this tag up a layer. And that tag is now on the null, and I'm now free to grab my object. And let's say my fish was wrong. I could spin him around backwards, and now he'd be facing correctly. Mine was already correct, so we can just undo. I'll even leave it in the null because that's just a nifty thing. You can automatically reorient it that way. Now, let's make sure that he's not popping in any kind of weird directions from his tangential thing. If it's working, then we just leave it. Keep in mind that this is traveling at about 1/3 of the... Oh, before we do this, we should probably give him a keyframe. So at the time of 0, I want the position to be 0. At the, I'm not sure how long we want, but let's just do the entire timeline, 333. Let's drag this up to 100. Oh, it looks like he's traveling really well, so we might not need a rail spline, although I will make one just in case you're not familiar with them. I'm going to record that as well. Now, keep in mind that by default, Cinema records its keyframes as spline, which means it's kind of easing in and easing out. So I could grab that point and change it to be linear, and I can go down here and carefully drag on the very bottom and select that and change this also be linear. And now he's going to be moving at constant speed across the entire spline. And we can see, if we hit play, oh, look at him. That's adorable. Now let's just check it out in real time. I'm going to turn off the hair just so now we're actually, it's still a little bit slower. So I think maybe some of the rock stuff and all the other things I was doing are maybe a little more complicated. We can see he's doing a very nice job, very calmly swimming. I think it's actually, that's pretty good. It maybe is a little bit of a bump right there. So if we were inclined, we can always go in there. And I did create 2 points right on top of each other in a very close proximity. So I could just delete one of those and it'll smooth that out a lot. You can move things around and whatnot. Now, let's just say that the fish was not correctly rotated the way you want. The way you would do that would be, I'm going to duplicate the entire path and I'm going to rename it fish path rail. And this is now going to be the direction that he travels. So let me show you. Inside of the align to spline, there's a place to put a rail path. So let's drag that in. And it's going to get a little bit confused in the beginning. But if we just scroll and go to any particular point, like right here, the fish is at the beginning, you see he's kind of laying flat, so it kind of looks like he died. We don't want that. So I'm going to grab the equivalent point to where he is approximately, and I can just move this in space, and that becomes his secondary axis. Now, it looks like for where he's currently, and we want to flip to the opposite side. So I'm not sure. Let me click on the fish. This is his X plus. His X plus becomes his up vector. So all we want to do is always take the equivalent position on the rail spline at any given point and scoot it a little bit on what would be the fish's X plus. So we could just scoot this forward until he gets a little bit weird, or, we just kind of know it's on X plus. So I could always just keep grabbing these and scooting them a little bit onto the X plus. And now I have very direct control over the way its rotation should be. And if you are inclined, over here, let me just show you. If we were to scoot it over here, you see he's doing a very good job of floating, and we have very nice orientation. But let's say right here, we wanted him to flip around or lay flat or anything. I can grab this point, and I can start moving it up. And you see, if I move it up instead of on X, he's going to start tilting over. So right there, you could tilt. We could have him bank a little bit. So right there, he moves down. I could still move it over. So you do still have the ability to do that. And as he swims here, we could grab this one. And now we can say, no, that one should orient back on X pretty flat. So that would straighten them back out again. So this enables you to, without any keyframes, create, completely control the orientation that it should be facing. You see right here, he's going to tilt a little bit flatter and then straighten himself back out again. So we have complete control over the rotation of this via just moving these secondary points. So rail splines are very nice, very powerful, and you should definitely use them. All right. Well, all of that seems set up and ready to rock. So we shall give this one final save. Rewind all the way, turn on, not the tracer, that one's done. Turn on the hair, and that should turn on all the tentacles. And even that, our fish should be swimming through, but I'm even inclined to let's keep it simple. Let's just make a camera, and it will target the fish. So target tag, or camera. I'm going to link to the POV of the camera by clicking on this little kind of aim icon. I don't know what it's called, but we'll click on that. Right click and make a target tag. And I just want the camera to target the fish directly. So now it's going to look right at the fish. If we hit play, anywhere the fish goes, the camera is going to be looking right at it. So we could actually place ourselves someplace a little bit more in the environment. Something like here, so we can be seeing everything maybe a little bit lower. I'm not sure. This could be, keyframe the camera. It's just going to keep on looking at the fish. But as he passes through, those should suck in. And yeah, that's working quite nicely. And these should, we can even right now hit render, and we should be able to see they sucked in, and the fish is staring into our soul. Keep going. The fish will swim, 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 swim. Actually, it's working quite well. He's not even passing through it. And then he'll turn the corner, and then you'd probably cut the shot. But there's a lot of fun. We could layer and layer and layer. This kind of stuff never ends. We could make some particles coming down. I wonder if you could even make it so that there's like turbulence, or these would react a little bit to the particles. Like there's so many places we go further. And like I said, this is hopefully just, a tutorial on project 1. And I've got like some additional ideas of things to do with hair and fields. So we might see additional projects in the future on those as well. So we will set this up to do a quick render, because why not? I guess our fish, I didn't think about it, but the fish is not luminant. So I'm going to make 2 quick materials for our fishy. So we will make a luminant. It'd probably be good to make them shiny, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. We'll just make a gold color. I'm going to turn this off. We'll make a gold color for the fish. Be good to name these, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. And then this eye. So let's just put these on the fish. So that's on the fish. And then this will be on his, those are his pupils. So we'll drop those on there. I guess we need a black one for his pupils. So no luminance on that one. Bing, bing. So he'll just pop a little bit in this kind of very, very stylized, simple world. Hit render on that one. And there's our very flat fish. Okay, I just skipped the rendering. It took about 6 minutes, not very long. And here's what we end up with. And I definitely see some changes I want to make. So we're going to make a few changes, but let's take a look. Oh, he's so cute. We need to zoom back out a little bit because we're not getting to see the plants expanding that much. They're getting a little bit, they look a little bit weird and sparkly down here. I think it's because they're shrinking in all the way. So let's make them not quite shrink in all the way. I also think it'd be really fun to add some bubbles to them. And this background is just so flat. I think we can make that pop a little bit more. So let's just hit all of these very quickly. Now, if we don't want these to flatten out quite all the way, it's really simple to make that change. I'm going to go into our hair base, and on our last vertex map, all we need to do is make a curve. So if we make a curve from the modifier layers, here is it going all the way to the bottom. And all I'm going to do is grab that and pull it up a little bit. So now it cannot shrink down quite all the way. Another thing I saw is the fish is kind of intersecting this plant a little bit. So I'm just going to do a rectangle selection. Actually, I'm going to delink from our camera so I can find both of those. There we go. Both points. And I can just grab both those points and pull both of them up into the air a little bit and maybe back a little bit just to make sure he doesn't intersect with that one. Another thing I noticed that I would love to do is let's not have the plants get really dark. They're like black all the way to the base. So what I'm going to do is actually scoot this dark point forward a little bit, and let's grab a slightly lighter point and pull that back a little bit. And now when I hit render, we've got the plants. You see they get lighter as they go down again. And now we can grab our base and underside. I'm going to brighten those back up again. So we're multiplying it by a lot. I don't need to be precise. I just want these to, yeah, there we go. So now they're maybe a little too bright. Let's find the point where it's pretty close. I just want them to blend in. I just want a little more of a splash of color there. Yeah, I think it's right around there, where they're just kind of blending a little bit seamlessly from one to the other. In fact, that stripe I just made, probably a little dark. So let's grab this one and not overlay something quite so dark. And we should still get our nice gradient. That's looking nice. Excellent. And then, okay, now the next thing I think that would be great is let's make our fish have some bubbles. Now, what I'm actually going to do, actually, no, a couple things. Like I said, let's move our camera back. The camera's a little bit close for the overall animation. I just want to see a little bit more of the context of the overall rock. Let's turn off the hairs just so we can see this, and I can scrub a little bit quicker. So there we go. Now we're just back a little bit, but we're focused on the fish, which is what we want, but I want to see a little bit more of our environment here. So instead of targeting the fish, let's create a null, put the null in the fish, zero it out, and let's say target null1, which we shall rename target. And now I can target the fish, but a little bit lower. And now I can just look at the environment a little bit more. Let's make sure that that looks pretty good through the entire thing. Now we're very low and we see the fish and he comes along, but we're seeing the environment a lot better. And he disappears around the corner. Excellent. Now, right now we still see him, but I think he'll be hiding behind the anemone by the time he gets there. So I like that. Next up, I'm going to hit save just in case. Next up, let's go and give him some bubbles. Why not? It's fun. We'll copy and paste it into this scene, but just to get some scale and make it run really quickly, I'm going to copy the fish, new file, paste the fish, and there he is. I'm going to hit reset PSR so it zeroes out, and now there's the fish. So really simple for us to now create a particle, a basic Cinema 4D particle emitter. I want it to emit, I don't know, let's say 6 particles. And the size of it should be 0, 0. And then I'm going to move it up right here to his mouth. And what should that be emitting? Well, if we hit emit right now, it's just going to spit them forward. I think I want them to immediately have a little bit of speed. So I'm going to rotate it upward. And we'll see it more, but now they at least have some initial speed. And then I want them to continue upward with some speed. So I'll also create a simulate wind. And here's a wind that we will aim straight upward. And I'm not sure how strong it is, but hit play. And that should be, yeah, these will kind of accelerate a little bit as they go. And that is excellent. And we can even call this wind bubbles. And then I want to control the way these are emitting very clearly. So instead of cloning a bubble, and a very simple bubble at that, I'm just going to create a sphere. And honestly, I think I might just make another white luminant material. So like everything we're aiming for here has been very cartoony. So just straight white luminant is about as cartoony as we can go here. Put that in, and instead of dropping it in the emitter, let's create a cloner. And I'm going to drop this into the cloner and clone onto an object. The object, of course, being the emitter. And we can say emitter bubbles. And excellent. So this should be now creating a clone on top of every single one of those. Now, our fish isn't moving, so I feel like it might not be giving us very good feedback right now. So I'm going to put the bubbles inside of the fish, and let's just keyframe the fish real quick. I'm not sure how fast it'll be moving. I just want to have an idea of what the bubbles are doing. So yeah, at the end, which is about 3 frames, we'll have the fish moved to about there. That should give us a fine idea. Bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, neat. I think there's maybe too many bubbles, but we'll see after we finish the scaling. So right now they're going to be full scale all the time. We don't want that. So let's create a linear, or I'm sorry, a plane effector. Man, plane effectors have gotten so powerful now with fields. I don't want to affect the position, but I do want to affect the scale. And the scale is going to be uniform, the same in all directions, in an absolute way. So I want it to be -1. And that means all of the bubbles should be scaling down to 0. There's none. But now we can give it a fall off. I'm going to say fall off spherical field. And the spherical field will be in the fish, PSR, reset PSR, scoot it to the front. And now that is where they're going to begin. Now I want to give this a full fall off, like that, and we can just keep on scaling this up. And now you can see the bubbles will get bigger as they go, as they move away from the fish. So it's kind of like as they're raising to the surface, there's less pressure, so they can inflate a little bit more. But they're still a little bit big overall. So I'm going to T for scale and scale them. Let's grab the bubble, T for scale, scale them all down, and then I don't want them to be 0 at the beginning. So let's go to the plane, and I think it's under max. If we pull the max back, the reason we're using max instead of min is because we're doing the opposite. We're scaling these down. So I want them to scale down less. So we're pulling down the max. So now you can see when they're created, they'll already be existing a little bit. And then just for fun, let's add a random. As long as we're doing the extra effort, we'll make a random. This will not affect position, but it will affect the uniform absolute scale. And now these can all scale upward to get a little bit bigger. So we can have some random bubbles, and they're a little big again. So I'll just scale them down overall. Excellent. Then we can hit play. And bloop, 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 bloop. Okay. Now I don't want them colliding with fish too much, so I'm going to emit them faster in the beginning. So let's about double that, about 300. Yeah, and now you can see they're shooting out quicker, so they don't collide with the fish so much. They're moving straight up and down, but we're going to be putting in the scene with the turbulence. So let's go into this and grab our turbulence large and small, copy, open a new file, close the new file, and now automatically bring us to the one we were working in. Paste, and these should automatically be applied. Let's see if the turbulence makes those a little bit more interesting. Sort of. It doesn't feel like they're having, honestly, that much of an effect. So what I'm thinking is let's copy and paste the small turbulence, and I'm going to make it a lot stronger. I'm going to say like 55. And already we can see this is adding a lot more. So let's double that again, 111. There we go. Now you can see that we get some nice extra wiggle going on there. And honestly, even the scale's pretty good on that. Let's. I'm gonna try doubling again just to make sure, just to see. Yeah, that starts getting a little bit crazy. So like an extra 100 on there is pretty good. So we don't need the other large and small, but now we have a turbulence bubbles. But we have to remember on both the wind and the turbulence to make sure that the anemones are not seeing those. So we got to remember that. So this is all working really well. We can rename this clone bubbles, and all this bubble based stuff is kind of wrapped up together. Excellent. Even this is the bubbles. Good to name these kind of things. So what do we need? I think this is working well. We've got our bubbles coming out from the fish. And they are traveling up quick, and maybe the fish is going a little bit fast, so I'll slow it down a little bit. So the initial speed can be, I don't know, 222. They're living for 600, which is longer than our animation, which is fine. There we go. Yeah, I like that a lot. All right, so let's copy everything into the other scene file. So I'm going to copy bubbles, the effector, turbulence, bubbles, bump, 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 everything that's involved in it. Copy, copy, copy. Window. Back into the fish, paste all these things. In the actual fish itself, it needs the bubbles and it needs the fall off, and everything else is relative. So let's grab both of those, hit reset PSR. And I think right here we can just eyeball it. I'm going to pull it right until it's on the front of the fish. Excellent. And I think the last thing, if I'm remembering correctly, that I'd like to do is brighten this up a little bit. So, I mean, I think it looks great in this kind of simple cartoony world as the fish swims along, but it seems a little dark and dreary now that I'm looking at it. So let's change. Maybe I'm going to brighten the color up a little bit. Let's grab the environment. Everything is driven by the environment. I'm going to chill that out a little bit. Let's bring it a little bit more into the blue range. Maybe saturate it a little bit more. Yeah, that's already, oh, look at that. That's already more lively. But this is still very flat in the background. And these rocks are very flat as well. I wonder what we can do for the rocks. I'm not sure. Just make this up as we go. But honestly, maybe we just throw a noise in here. We had this fusion. I'm going to copy. We could put into a layer shader, of course, or we can use the new material stuff. But I'm just going to copy the fusion, go into the fusion, paste the fusion into the fusion, and we'll just put in we'll put in a noise to get some sort of pattern. I think in this case, a wavy turbulence might be nice. And it's just because it's kind of like a, actually, no, it wasn't wavy turbulence, maybe turbulence, where it's just kind of like a noise, but it just gives a little bit of something. And that's also set to overlay. I'm gonna hit render and let's just see if it's applying on the rocks. Yeah, you see there's just this little bit of stylized or just a little bit of texture on the rocks. But I gotta say, turbulence isn't doing it for me. Displaced turbulence, that's maybe the one I want. Displaced turbulence to me kind of has the same vibe that these rocks do, which is kind of like these soft but hard-edged shapes. So yeah, it's a little something to break up that patterning a little bit. And then we kind of need some sort of gradient in here because this is all very flat. So, and then honestly, these rocks just stopped, but I don't think I'm going to do anything to fix that. Maybe the camera's a little too far away, or it moves up. No, I can't really think of a way. I don't want to zoom in anymore, but these rocks just terminate. But we're cloning onto those, so I don't want to mess that up. And this is all bonus detail. But what I do want to do is let's go to a side view, and you can see here's our overall setup. And I'm going to create a light, and let's move the light up pretty far. And I'm going to say light. No illumination. We don't need that. But what we do want is to see your visible light. So this is just going to become a big old visible light. And I'm going to scale it up pretty large. Now, that could be too much. But let's hit render and see what we get. Oh, look at that. Look how we get this like kind of illumination vibe from the top. And there's kind of this gradient fall off as it travels down. So we're kind of getting this inherent murkiness from that. Now, if we're inclined, we could give it a little bit of color. You could colorize that. We could, even change it a little bit. Make it kind of a green color, or, you have a lot of control over the way that could change. I think leaving it pretty light and maybe even going 150 on the brightness, maybe, just pop that a little bit. It starts getting a little bit flat, honestly. So maybe actually not. Maybe we can do that, but make it a little bit brighter of a blue. Yeah, that helps. Yeah, it's kind of nice. And then actually, because it gets so nice and kind of bright there, I wonder, I don't know, these are just live experiments, but we could always try darkening this background a little bit. So if that's darker, then it's going to be a little bit more gray, and then maybe the light can make it pop. But I gotta tell you, that's actually kind of killing it. So makes me want to do the opposite. Let's brighten it up. And there you go, a little bit more lively. And then this has all this color, but you know what? No, let's go back to 100% and increase the gradient. And now you get this nice overall fall off. Now, there's a lot of different things we could potentially do. Like if this feels a little bit more powerful in the middle, it's because it's a big spherical light. But there's things we could do where you could like move the light further away and increase the radius. And as we do, essentially we're making it flatter and flatter. So we could potentially do that kind of thing and just keep on countering the brightness a little bit. So this should be a little bit more of a transition of the gradient. But now that we're on the edge, we could start increasing the brightness more. So yeah, now we get the gradient back. So a nice little push and pull. And there's a lot of different types of lights. We could try the, oh, look at that. We could try some of the parallel spots and whatnot, but honestly, just this little gradient one is working well for me. So we just changed a bunch of things. Hopefully these don't quite go down to zero. And right here, you can see it doesn't seem like they go all the way to zero. We brightened these up, changed the rock a little bit, which honestly feels like it could be a little darker and maybe have a little bit of color. So I'm going to say multiply by a little bit of this color here. And it should just make it darker and have a little bit of color on top of it. And that should kind of make that fade away. Yeah, that's going to make that fade away a little bit. And now we got our flat fish. Hopefully some bubbles coming up. Ooh, almost forgot. The anemone, the hair, has forces, and we need to exclude bubbles and the turbulence bubbles, because otherwise those will be applying and they'll be blowing way up into the air. So we don't want that. So let's give this a save as the next version. Yeah, go ahead and override that one. And now let's just give this one another render. Should probably take almost exactly 6 minutes. Whoop, quick little thing I just noticed I want to fix. These get really dark over here, and then I just realized when we reset the PSR on the bubbles, then we aim them forward a little bit. So let's just fix those two things. So we'll stop that. Real easy. We'll grab the bubbles and then rotate them up. They're 90 degrees here. So they're aimed up. And then the anemone, we need to pop open their wind. I'm going to double click the material. And if you go into the illumination tab, then we have two settings we want to get rid of. The roughness, we'll get rid of that. And then the diffuse, which is actually kind of creating the shading on it. If we get rid of both of those and hit render, you can see that one spot that kind of had shadow that was taking away the cartooniness is now very flat looking, which is what we're going for here. Excellent. And now with that, let's go back and render. Okay, we're about 7 minutes later and the render is finished. Let's take a look at it. We got our little fishy swimming along. Excellent. Yeah, look at the reaction on these. This is great. Like, this transition is really nice. Exactly what I want. I love the way the bubbles come around the bottom. I'm not going to re-render. A couple things maybe I tweak right there. The fish does kind of a somewhat harsh turn right there, so I'd want to smooth out that spline just a little bit. The bubbles around here seem to go a little bit wild. A couple of them, the turbulence is letting that one escape. I don't know if it bothers me too much because I like the rest of it. But I could always give a fall off onto that if I want to. There could be some other gradients, like some other light fall offs around here. I mean, stylistically, we weren't really trying to make too much in the way of art. This is more about the technical part, but hey, try and make it look a little nice and stylized. Why not? It is fun. Yeah, I really like the way that this turned out. I mean, it's obviously not complete. It was just a fun little project. We took it a little bit more to completion, or at least stylistically doing something with it than I was originally aiming for. But, the main thing here is supposed to be the takeaway of hair and feels and just having fun with that. But, we'll just take the projects kind of where they bring us. So hopefully I'll be able to have some tutorials coming out on a somewhat more regular basis. This was actually filmed in front of a live studio audience, actually just people online in the chat. So getting some notes and what people would like to see. So it's kind of fun. Yeah, that was really fun. This was a fun project. It's kind of an experiment. I'm going to try and do these weekly tutorials where I'm trying not to overthink it and just get some cool techniques out there. Now, we tried to make this one kind of a little more finished, a little more stylized, not properly, but, more than I was aiming for originally. The real point here is the techniques using hair and fields and just some fun ways that you might be able to implement them. This was just one project of hopefully many. I got a couple of different ideas just involving hair, and the plan is to do these weekly. In fact, I filmed this with a live chat going of people from Patreon, and they're helping come up with the ideas and what they'd like to see and some places to go and little bits of feedback. So it's really fun if you want to participate in that and you want to help me and support these kind of tutorials, or if you ever found them helpful, then I do have a Patreon set up. You get the scene files. The scene files from this project and from all the live streams are going to be on there. And, it's really appreciated, but all the content is going to end up on YouTube one way or the other for everyone. So with that in mind, thanks for watching. I'll see you in another tutorial or in another live stream sometime soon. So thank you so much for watching, and bye-bye.